and stay by the mic. Um, Can anybody hear me? Is this loud enough? Is this going to be okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? How about you in the back? If you guys can hear me. Okay, good. We should be pretty good then. This looks like a fairly intimate group, so it's only supposed to be Q&A, so we can do this any way you guys want to do it. I can grade you on your questions, and you can grade me on my answers. However, I suggest pass fail. I put up a little slideshow here that just kind of covers the whole career, the last 36 years of what I've been doing. But I'm going to switch over to the slideshow that goes into a little more detail. Unless we want to just start, do we want to just start with questions, or do you want to hear history and back in the day and all the old reminiscences first before we do questions? Everybody wants to hear history first? Raise your hand. All right, then I got to do the history. All right, then we'll do that. We will do that. Actually, that's my favorite part anyway. I love talking the old days. All right. And we will start that now. Oh, shoot. I'll try to stay seated. I am Brian Colin. I am a artist, animator, game designer, filmmaker from, well, let's see, I was born in 1956. And I went to school for film, moved over to animation as a specialty, won a lot of awards for animation. I'm technically an international award-winning filmmaker, which is cool. Hugh Hefner's parrot bit me in the grotto. Chevy Chase met me outside for a smoke after an award ceremony. These are all other stories I'm not going into tonight, but I'm just to kind of giving you, I was a filmmaker and an animator, got out of college, and I started a thriving advertising business in which I would do ads and stuff for local banks and bars, and pretty much did kind of the free beer and popcorn to get paid. And then one day I answered an ad at the Valley Midway Company and sent my stuff in, and they said, yeah, come on in. I was very surprised, to hear. And I walk in the door, and I don't know if any of you have seen George Gomez here today. He was one of the first guys to interview me. They had their small development group outside the main offices of Valley, and I walk in thinking I'm going in for a job. This was my advertising kind of stuff I did back in the day. I thought I was applying for a job as a pinball backglass artist because of my artistic style. I thought would be perfect for doing pinball backglasses. And they start showing me around the video game department and say, no, you're here as an animator. We want to hire you as an animator to do video games. And I plastered this smile on my face because my kind of animation is more Bugs Bunny, and I'm looking at Ms. Pac-Man going, oh my God, childhood is over. I've got a real job. I can't turn down money, but I was not really thrilled, to be honest. And then I thought childhood was over, and I was totally wrong, because the very first game I worked on was Discs of Tron, and that completely opened my eyes to what could be done with this very limited system. For those of you that remember the Discs of Tron environmental cabinet, it was 3D and you believed it. The sound was incredible. The experience was mind-blowing. So while I only did art and animation on that game, it made me realize that with somebody behind the vision who understood what they were going for and would not compromise, because Bob Dinnerman was the programmer on that, and It was supposed to be part of the original Tron is the story, but he just said, no, it'll be done when it's done. So I was lucky enough to have that game be the first game I worked on. And then one of the great things about the industry at that time was management. They had a lot of money. They were a pinball company, but they, some of their games, Pac-Man, whatever, they had the funds, but they really didn't know what they were doing in terms of how to manage, so they left us alone. We were a small team. We were outside the factory. Guys like George Gomez he'd wear different hats every day, and I got to wear different hats. And as an artist, I get to work with everybody on every project. So you find out what's good and what's bad and who's easy to work with and who needs a little coaxing. And they let us try stuff. I'm there for just a few months, and they had a game that's bombing out on test. And I said, well, it's a fun game. So I went to the programmer and said, I'm going to give you all new cartoony art for it. And what was called Mothership became Cosmic Cruiser. The game went back out on test, the earnings shot up, it became a game. And so in those days, and which is very different from a corporate situation now, they were letting us try. And that gave me I can do anything I want, better to ask forgiveness than ask permission. Now, not everything you did went out and became a blockbuster game or even got produced. Ant Raid was a tremendous game, but the programmer on that never did a single player version, but it was a strategy and tactics game where ants fought over food in a garbage dump. It was a great two-player game, but it never got produced, so you're never going to see that one out in the world. The bottom line is those early days were very much at Bally Midway, peer-to-peer. I'm talking to you, he comes into your office, you come into his. Very much a natural, fun kind of, we're all in this together. Now, Spy Hunter, you all know Spy Hunter. That did become a great game. You can see some of the early creative work up there, and some of it we may want to edit for children. But one of the days that, we had no name for it. We had this great finished game. We had no name. So we all sat down, and we had just been handed these books where we were supposed to record everything and then have it co-signed. So that's all the nonsense at the bottom with all of us co-signing. But very much everybody that's signing down there was coming up with ridiculous names, one for another. The bottom line, if you're actually reading any of those, is we were having fun. And it showed in what we ended up doing. Spy Hunter is just one example. I still have some concept art over in the booth there when I was thinking the game's going to be called Battle Scars, because the CARS would be at the end. But fortunately, they didn't go with Battle Scars, and that was my concept art there. They went with Spy Hunter instead. So over the years, you're working with this group and you're working with everybody, but you find out that some games are more fun to work on than others for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it had to do with some people said, let's try this. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's try this. No, that doesn't work. Let's try this. No, that doesn't work. And where other people, I kind of became a game designer out of self-defense, because as a artist, I am naturally lazy. I would rather do something once. So it's like, let's plan, let's work on stuff. And I started gravitating towards people that would let me plan what we're doing next. Demo Derby game, you guys may remember, great 4-player game, 2-player game. Worked on that. Like I said, all the artists got to work on pretty much everything. Worked on this with Jeff Nauman. He was a fairly new programmer, started around the same time I did. Practical guy, just as lazy as I was, so we kind of gravitated together on several projects then. This was one of the first. We also enjoyed long lunches, research lunches, in which we would not probably crawl back to the office until 4 o'clock and then stay till midnight. After we did Demo Derby together, we did Sarge together. And if you don't remember Sarge, you controlled a helicopter and a tank, but you only had one guy, so you had to run back and forth between the two. Fun little game. And the thing about that period too was that I still love to this day was the fact that testing was not focus group. Testing was not marketing. You're going to the arcade and you're standing in their back and you're in the back of the arcade and you're watching why they're putting in another quarter, why they're walking away, not just on your game, but on everybody's. And that's one of the reasons I loved this period so much. Now, again, not every game goes like you think it should. Sometimes just because you can do something doesn't mean you should try. This was a game in which the player was Patui Louie was a giant watermelon eating, seed spitting pterodactyl who would run along the ground, eat watermelons. A bikini clad woman in a fur bikini with boomerang was riding on his back. And then you would jump into the air and battle with giant invisible killer bees while she threw boomerangs and you spit watermelon seeds. Now, how did that not take off? I'm sorry. Well, the reason it didn't is because we only had so many resources, and because we were scaling, ran out of art. So by the time we were ready to go to test, the only time the bees were visible is when they were next to you, but if they were above you and below you, you couldn't see them. So it didn't do very well. So those are failures. You learn from your mistakes. This one was, from day one, the one we knew. Myself and a couple other artists, one of the sound guys, would come back from a trade show, and we said, I was like, why can't we do a game with big background animation? And they're like, well, no, our hardware won't do it. I said, what do you mean it won't do it? No, we don't have enough this, we don't have enough this. Unless it's a rectangle, you're not going to animate it. So I looked at Sharon and I said, wait a minute, a rectangle falling into itself, that's a building that's just been demolished. And now because I'm a cartoonist and I hadn't had a chance that much yet to do big characters, it's like now I can do big characters, I can show their faces, I can show comedy. Sat down, wrote up the game design, pulled in Jeff Nauman again and said, I want to make sure this stuff that I'm thinking of the game write-up with, this is the story of Rampage page. This is, there you can see, or this is why next year's #1 game. Grabbed that thing, went to my boss, smacked it down in front of him because everybody that saw it loved it. And of course he said, no. Okay, he was a fairly new manager, so I immediately went over his head to the head of vice president of engineering, said, love it, really great concept. There's nothing else out there like it is there? And I like, no, not at all. And he said, okay, in that case, no. So right around that time, I was discouraged, but I was still making the characters anyway. And I was still working on it. And Bally Midway replaced all its upper management with a guy who formerly ran Montgomery Ward's, if you remember that retailer. He came in and his first day on the job, he said, I have an open door policy. Guess who was the first person in his office in his reign as president at 9 o'clock the next morning? And he loved it, signed off on it, and the rest, as they say, is history because the game broke every earnings records. We got to do a lot because they weren't telling us we couldn't. The head of marketing said, no, we're not going to do a marketing campaign for this because it's not anything that we know how to market. I said, we're destroying hundreds of cities in the U.S. So I wrote a 3-page press release that just said, your city, Peoria, or whatever it is about to be destroyed, and sent it to about 150 newspapers and television stations all over the country and generated tons of press. So because we knew what we had and we were passionate about it, again, that doesn't always mean it's going to work, but in this case, it resonated with the public because from a design standpoint, I'm not the best video game player. One of the things I wanted to do in Rampage is make sure there was no wrong way to play it. because we wanted the earnings. We knew that we wanted to let people buy in, so we didn't want it to end per se. So there were 765 days or something like that in the original Rampage, each a little different. And we knew you were going to be playing with strangers. So if this guy wasn't cooperating right, or this guy, so you could fight with each other, you could cooperate, you could play it any way you wanted to. And for me, I think that's part of its success is it spanned gender. It wasn't just a guy's game. It spanned age because parents would play it with their kids. There's no wrong way to play it. And because of the what we had to make out of very little, everything was tiny. So that guy who's sitting on the toilet that you eat and then get a face full of water that makes you laugh was only that big, so we could afford to put a ton in there. Rampage was one of the first games that they let me do everything. They let me do all the cabinet art, for example, so I could do the footprints going into the buildings, going into them fighting way in back. Zwackery, interestingly enough, there were only like 200 made. It was a Dungeons and Dragons game, and it was pretty cool, but last minute it got put on a very expensive hardware. But Zwackery, for those of you lucky enough to have ever seen one, used the Discipron controls, which were fairly robust. Joystick, three-way joystick. It is of interest for me only because they were showing Nolan Bushnell through the offices, and I had this game up. Was just about to go out on test, and he stopped in, and for the first time ever, management turned to Nolan and said, "And this is the designer, Brian Colin." Now, no one had ever been called a designer before. I mean, next day I ran right out and put it on my business card. I was on top of the world because they were always very much about, no, we all do our job. It was a great time. I don't know where we're at. Oh, and at the time, they let me do an interactive film. Laser discs were hot at the time, so I went out and said, hey, I was a filmmaker. I can do an hour-long interactive film. Give me a budget, give me some months. We actually went out in the coldest February on record in Chicago in an abandoned mental institution that was 13 stories high that had electricity but no heat, and shot this thing. But by the time we were done shooting and editing it, Bally had decided that laser discs, a more cost-effective way to do Laserdisc games would be to use a video disc player. Now, for those of you old enough to remember, the difference between a Laserdisc and video disc is a needle. So they released NFL football with a video disc player in it, and the first time that thing got bumped, you had a $4,000 doorstop in your arcade. So they got out of the Laserdisc business, and Deathstalker never happened until last October. It was finally released by the Galloping Ghost. The only one in the world is at Galloping Ghost. So a little digression there, kind of jumped up ahead 30 years. Xenophobe. Now, I'm going to take a drink. You guys think for a minute as a group, confer among yourselves if you want to keep going, or do we want to stop and ask the question? Otherwise, I'm going to drink for a minute. Always buy the best vodka when you're doing these things because it's much easier to do these. Xenophobe I did with a new programmer named Howard Shear, who was it was originally going to be a, you notice I asked you to think about it, but then I didn't ask you what you wanted to do, and then just started talking again. I ramble. You may have already noticed that. I will get off topic. Please feel free to just sit out there and shake your head or go like this, whatever it takes. But I'm going to keep going, unless you really do want. Anybody have a question for so far? Okay. Xenophobe. Xenophobe was going to be exploring pyramids, but the new programmer I was working with said, hey, I like science fiction. Aliens had just come out. You may see a slight parallel between Xenophobe and the movie Aliens. we had a lot of fun with that because it was parody. We got to be silly. It was also an exploration, kind of another Dungeons and Dragons type game where you walked around, you found things, and then where you learned how to use them, where to put this disc in or how to stop the timer or whatever. I was just making the observation earlier today that while Rampage is probably my best known game and some others I get more fan mail for, regionally, it's interesting, I think, that Xenophobe is more popular in Wisconsin than any other show I do, and I think that's only because TSR and Dungeons and Dragons were based out of Wisconsin too, and so there are a lot of game players who up there who really like the fact that we're all exploring independently, we're all finding these little things, and then we can use them together. So I never even put that together before today, but Wisconsin is a Xenophobe state. And again, Xenophobe after Rampage, they let me do all my own cabinet art, so I got to extend my puns and stuff, all over the cabinets. I had a lot of fun with it. I never did any ports. People ask me all the time about the home version of my games. I have most of them. I've not opened most of them because I've got the originals sitting in my basement that, either fell off the truck or somehow wandered out of the back of the factory. But again, and this is the watching the faces of people play, especially when they've never played before. This was the best thing and still is the best thing about, this was the best thing about making arcade games, testing arcade games, and it's the best thing about guys like you who are keeping this alive. Because I haven't seen this, until about a few years ago when I started coming to these shows, I haven't seen this. And it's so wonderful to see this again, especially when, you're watching someone just discover it for the first time. Let me back up there. We quickly had to do a game, a Laserdisc game was the theme for a European show. It bombed. It did not do well. We tried to put way too much into it. It eventually got re-skinned and kind of cleaned up and became Blasted, which was a dedicated arcade game, 2-player. Basically all you did in that game, which for its time was just fine, but you shot out the window at little objects and you shot your laser across the street at people and broke their furniture and, just had a lot of fun doing destructive things to the apartment building across the street, all in good, clean fun. That's my lovely wife, and some idiot holding a laser tag gun. Max RPM was one of the games where we tried with our non-scrolling hardware to fake that kind of using the color, changing the color palettes to make you feel like you're going down the road. It worked pretty well. The programmer on that was very much into stick shifts and wanted realistic driving, even though we didn't have much. I only throw this one in because for a brief time we did what they called pack games, where they decided they were going to use that Pac-Men were never going to get played or collected, so that they would use that old hardware and kit them and shoot the bull. If anybody ever has a chance to find one, was an actual kit for Pac-Man that was a tremendous game. Around this time, we got bought out. Near this time, Bally Midway was eventually bought out by Williams, as most of you know, in '89. This is everyone saying goodbye with a little gesture to Midway. And somebody from a trade show had take that nice game over and put it up there. But before Williams bought us, Jeff Nauman and I had started on Arch Rivals. Now, in this case, Jeff came up with the original concept. He wrote it on a barf bag while coming back from a trade show. He wanted to use the multi-character stuff we've done before and do a real basketball strategies. He's like, Brian, you can set a pick and you can, and I said, Jeff, this is over my head. All I want to know is, can I foul somebody? So the punching was me, the good basketball strategy was Jeff, and together we got about 3/4 of the way through it. Williams bought us. Jeff and I were the only two video guys they kept. We finished Arch Rivals, and later one of the Williams salespeople told me, and I don't know if it's true, but I still love to tell it anyway, that the sales from arch rivals paid for the buyout. So that always feels good. Like I said, don't know if it's true or not, but I always got to share that one. And that's pretty much the arcade years. No, actually, well, there was one more. We said we wanted to do a football sequel to Arch Rivals as our next game at Williams, and our new bosses said, no, we've already got a Arch Rivals football game in the works. It's like, wait a minute, we just released Arch Rivals. How can you have an Arch? Well, we have a football game, but we think we're going to rename it. So instead, I said, okay, well, let's go a little crazier. We don't want to be competing in our own company with a second football game. So that's when we decided to arm the players with swords and torches and battle axes, and we did Pigskin, which, again, this is one of those games that all the way back to that ant raid, you're controlling 6 people now at once. You're calling for a pass, you're throwing pass. You've got different players who have different positions on the field. We had a ball with this game. It is probably still my favorite of all the head-to-head games we ever did, Demo Derby and Sarge and Arch Rivals and Xenophobia. This was a game where I've had the most fun with just because it's so unpredictable. And if somebody has design questions later, ask me about Pigskin. So this was then pretty much the end of my early arcade years. EA kept calling me up and asking me to come out to work for them. And I said, I love California to visit. I won't live there. Eventually, after months and months of this, they said, all right, what if we gave you the money to start your own company? So I worked on Jeff for a while and kind of talked him into it. And we then we left Williams Valley Midway under good terms and formed our own company, Game Refuge. Game Refuge we started in '92, so 10 years after I got in the industry, and our first game for Game Refuge was a Sega Genesis game, unlike any other, called, well, this was us. We were out in the middle of nowhere. It was just the two of us working on the game, working in the company at the time. Man, that's an old picture. Our first game was General Chaos for EA. And what was nice about that is it was their number one selling in non-licensed title for the year that it was released. It attracted such a intense audience that they developed a 4-player controller just specifically for this game after it came out for a while. And then after General Chaos, we did anything and everything that came along. We did more console projects. We did games for PC. We did more arcade games again, EA had a short-lived arcade division that they pulled us out of their Sega to bring over and do a game for them for that. We've done casino games. We've done advert games, we've done Facebook games, we've done mobile games. This is just going to keep running on and on and on forever. But I don't know if I don't know if we're straying into territory that you guys might want to stop and say, while I stop and drink a water, and this time I promise I'm going to ask you, do we want to keep listening to this, or do we want this? I can leave this on in the background, or we can talk about other projects, other things going on. Ask me questions about the old stuff. Think about it for a sec. I don't even take a breath. What's wrong with me? Wow. Well, yeah. Out on our own, we were in there talking to. I lied. I didn't ask you again, did I? We were in Williams' offices every few years when we'd see him at a trade show. Ken Fedesna, who was running Williams Midway at the time, would say, "When you coming back? When you coming back?" It's like, because apparently we didn't know this at the time, but a lot of designers would quit and then come back and quit and then come back to. And we said, no, we're happy, but we love to do games. So they told us they had a need they had their 14-year-old male covered. They had all these, Mortal Kombat's coming up, and they had the great games, but they needed something, for the everyman. So Jeff and I looked at each other and said, let's redo Rampage. And with Rampage, we had a much bigger staff at this time. I think he had 6 programmers. I had 6 artists. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And we were allowed to do a ton of stuff we couldn't do the first time, because in the first Rampage, you played 765 days, and all we had the resources for at the end of the game was to go, arg, and that was it. We got a lot of crap for that. For World Tour, we made sure we filled it with big cinematic endings and everything else, and I see a hand. Oh, not at all. You have not played your World Tour well enough, sir. I'm sorry to say. Does anyone out here know what happened to the 4th character? Absolutely. If you couldn't hear that, it was a 4-player game. They asked us originally. We did it as a 4-player. About 3/4 of the way through, they said, no, let's make it a 3-player. So we had this 4th character named Vern, a flying bat, purple bat, that we said, all right, we were just told, if you eat the radioactive stuff, anything glowing purple, anywhere in the game, you will turn into Vern, and now you can fly and take down buildings and move 10 times faster than everybody else. So it was one of our many, many surprises and hidden features, because we got so much grief for there not being much in the original. I mean, does everybody know you can go to Area 51, right, in Rampage World Tour? You can go to hell and eat Adolf Hitler. You can eventually end up on the moon. We went nuts with it. We had a lot of fun with that game. But yeah, that was Vern. That was Vern, the 4th player. I'm taking a breath. After Rampage, I said we've got some ideas for some great 3D touchscreen games, because touchscreens were all card games. And so, much to our surprise, William said no. They were doing touchscreen stuff. So we went to Merritt. We did 4 games for them. And I don't think I'm revealing too much here. They had a standard royalty. We just took their standard stuff. And they had a standard royalty, little kickback on every quarter, based on how much, the percentage of how much your game earned in the machine. That's how big your royalty got. We did the 4 games for them. They quadrupled their sales the year we did that tennis ace and the puck shot and the air shot. They quadrupled their sales, and they had so many complaints from all their interior and other developers that our games were getting so much money that they renegotiated and cut our royalty by 75%, because, it's just not fair to everybody else that people are playing your games. So that's when you learn. People always ask, as a businessman, I'm a terrific game designer. Okay? But the only way you stay in business is you learn from every mistake you ever make. I'm not a business guy, but, I managed to hang on for 36 years, so that says something. From there, we did casino machines. We were approached by someone who was going out to IGT, and he said, I want you guys to help us teach my new people out here how to make slot machines that are fun. Our first game was the Munsters. Unlike our experience on the arcade side, where something's on the line for 6 months and they move on, IGT and the casino groups, IGT had a mile-long factory. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not too much, where they could redo any game they ever made for a period of like decades. So Munsters was in production for almost 10 years. We did a number of games for them. We did a number of games, then followed up casino games for WMS. Now we're getting up to, the end of the 90s now. Nah, that's a digression. I'm not going there. Now we're a couple years later. We were approached by a group who has said, "Hey, we've got a license for Star Trek Voyager, and would you be interested?" Of course, we're interested in anything that looks like it could be fun. I said, as long as I can do new monsters for it, that we're not strictly limited to what the show was. They were willing to do it. I handed down my 6-page, fairly long game document for us at the time, 6-page document. And they said, no, this is going to Paramount. Can you pad this out to about 120 pages? Which we did. So different people have different expectations, but basically it was the game we wrote up in 6 pages, and it did pretty well. I don't know, it was really popular in movie theaters. The capsule especially was a 6-foot monster cabinet that, it's a fun gun game and dual gun game, and it has dozens upon dozens of multiple paths that you trigger through all sorts of secret ways, so you never really play the whole. Even if you want to spend an hour and play the whole game through, you never will do that twice, because shooting that light bulb is going to send you on a different path whether you know it or not. So we had a lot of fun with that. We always try to find something in the game, no matter who's bringing it to us, that's going to make it fun for us, because I think if it's fun for us, it shows in the end result. And it ends up being fun for, well, with any luck, everybody. Okay, and that's gotten us up to this millennium now. Do we want to, anybody got any arcade questions? Anybody got any movie questions? Otherwise, we're going to keep talking. What was that? I still didn't hear that. Oh, thank you.
Is there any tip of the hats or Easter eggs hidden in any of your older games?
You mean like we used to? There were team efforts. So I mean, every game that I talk about being the designer or a designer on, there's always more than one. Well, in my experience, almost always more than one designer, developer. Certainly with the games I did with Jeff Nauman, he was a designer every bit as much as me, just because, I had the idea first or he had the idea first. But everybody that contributes, I consider a designer. So there's a lot of people I could spend 20 minutes. Go to my website, you'll see lists of dozens of people that help create all these games, each and every one of them. Tip of the hat, did you mean like hiding our names and stuff? In all the early games, we hid our names. The Side of Spy Hunter, you will see BC missiles are one of the things that, is in the schematics of the Spy Hunter car, and George's initials are in there, and Tom's and Sharon's and everybody that worked on it. We would hide our names in the, high score numbers when they first come up, the high score, enter your initials areas. We would hide stuff all over the place. We didn't do a lot of Easter eggs until later years, though. That was something that, with the resources as limited as we had, we didn't really have secret levels in any of the early stuff. That wasn't until after Rampage World Tour. Rampage World Tour, Star Trek Voyager, those have a ton of hidden stuff in them. Was that? Okay, cool. We're looking at Komatsu America hired us. They came in and wanted a little top-down Nintendo thing for their big Con Expo that's every few years. And they told me the budget, and I said, that's great, that'd be fine, but how about if we do a full 3D game where we can, the stage was about as big as this room, and they had we basically did 6 link driving games in which people drove their products through a 3D environment down a hill, and along the way we had live camera coverage, so the people in the audience would see up above, you would see not only would you see where different people were, you would see external camera coverage of the track, just like it was being covered on TV. So we could show their other products digging in the background or bulldozing. It was there you can see the monitors up top there, where one is showing the track from high above, one is showing all the different people, and then they would see the players' faces. Incredibly popular for them. They ran it 6 years running, 6 years running at their thing, and that was one of the most fun games I ever worked on. Only because remember how much I liked testing in the arcade days. This would have a line of 300 people waiting to play, laughing while they're watching the people play, and for 7 to 10 days in a row from morning till night. And I would be up there on the stage or, helping out with making sure nothing goes wrong. It was a ton of fun to watch these people play. And from a design challenge, if we got any design questions later, ask me about that one too. Okay. Moving on. Arctic Stud Poker Run was and still is a tremendous LAN game for someone that is willing to put up with the premise. This is not quite as bad as Patui Louie. This is full contact poker on heavily armed snowmobiles between up to six players, in which you can blow them up, steal their cards, and it's a race, and then you can guard the finish line, and it's insane. It's a ton of fun, and if you go to arcticstud.com, it's free. Download it, and if any of you ever still have the nostalgia for LAN games, it's a great betting game. Great, well, not legal betting, but we've had requests. Arctic Stud was a ton of fun. Let's see. We're now up to getting close to the end of the last decade. The cards were scattered out on this 9-mile area, so you had to find the cards, pick up the ones you want. There was a lot of fun. All right. And yeah, this is something everyone should know. This was the backstory on this. It was in a Cthulhu mythos situation. So just to make it even more ridiculous, the sponsor of the Arctic Stud tournament was an evil guy who made his beer out of, never mind. Okay. Let's move on. Cow tipping. Cow tipping we did for team play. It was a redemption game. It was actually based on a legal gambling game we developed that we never got picked up. And the folks at Team Play had us turn it into a little redemption game. My favorite thing about this game is the shirt. The T-shirt was marvelous. You get a lot of comments when you wear something like that. We've done. We were approached by a group who had a series of religious videos they'd done, and they did the graphics for this, and they wanted us to do a adventure game in which you were Moses or Aaron, and you would use kung fu moves and call down the wrath of God on Pharaoh and his minions, which, until you've seen Moses spinning in a circle on his staff, just taking out everybody in the room, you have not lived. So if you get a chance to pick that one up, do it. Around that time, the people at White Rabbit and who eventually became TouchTunes Playport asked us, the guys at Game Refuge, to come over and help them get their games done a little faster, because they had some experienced people, but the games were taking 8-9 months. We did 14 games in 18 months for them, and among their highest earners on this system too. The unfortunate, and it was a marvelous system, that if you're not familiar with that, it was at Buffalo Wild Wings and TGI Fridays, and it was connected to the jukebox, so everything could be downloaded. And the device itself, instead of being just locked to the bar top like an old normal merit game was, you slid your credit card through and you could take it back to your table. So it was a really brilliant system that the guys from Team Play White Rabbit built. Unfortunately, TouchTunes was married to the fact that they wanted money back from every quarter, like they get from their jukebox situation. And that did not go over with developers or operators. I'm not developers, with operators. No operator in the world was going to give back money on a game that normally they would put into their own pocket. So unfortunately, this, as great a system as this was, it failed. They gave away thousands of games worldwide, but eventually it failed. I really feel bad about that because it was a fun, well done system. And we did a bunch of games for it. All touchscreen, all a lot of fun. Okay, I'm going down memory lane here while I'm looking at these. All right, and then I think we did a Facebook game for somebody with a Discovery Channel license, Deadliest Catch. We did RC Squared is the one we did for EA that was never produced because their first game, this was supposed to be their first game as a new arcade division. They decided to go with NFL football, which they'd already sold the hell out of on every system ever. And their arcade version couldn't do as much as their home games. And then before we released this, about 2 months before it was supposed to go to test, they closed that division. So that was unfortunate. Flirt Planet 3D was another ambitious, really ambitious game in which the game basically learned your identity through the answers you gave in the game. You were an alien coming to Earth looking for love. We did that for a European group. Really interesting game from a development and design standpoint. As players walk up in a 3D world and start talking to this girl, she would say something and then you get to pick any one of the answers. And based on the answers you picked, we created a Myers-Briggs profile of your personality that would then provide you with easier people to pick up or more challenging people to try and date. And it was a huge fun game to work on for several years. All right, and that pretty much brings me pretty close to the last of the things I can talk about. Well, no, not quite. We did, Towards the end of this game, I had a social media guy that I brought on full time for this, and we were up to about 45 employees, and he convinced me that because of the enormous fan mail I get for General Chaos, that we should do a Kickstarter. And he lined up a huge tour, and we got a great response on our General Chaos 2 Kickstarter. We got started on it. And unfortunately, at the same time, 3 things happened. Our European client took his business to a group in India. I got cancer, and so we had to, I found out like literally the day before I went and did my first of my indoor tour. I did the Indoor Kids podcast out in California, and I found out the day before I went out there. So I was unable to do the tour. We did not get funded. We are still trying to fund and finish General Chaos 2. So if this time I think we're going to do it as an intellectual property syndicate in which everybody that invests gets a piece of the end, not just a Kickstarter where you get a happy little, toy or something like that, or a poster. I think we've done that once before with a casino game thing. We're going to do that, and I'm going to try and get that in place this year and finish up General Chaos 2 this year. Okay. These are some mobile apps we did recently that have been up there, and I think I'm about done with 36 years of history. Let me see if we go any farther here. Oh, here's Chaos 2. This is actual gameplay of where it is now. And it's going to be touchscreen. In the original General Chaos, you had to use Genesis joysticks to select and move guys. This is going to be touchscreen, drag your finger around screen. It's very cool. All right. I got to stand up for a minute. So that's pretty much my career. There's some other things I'm going to show you here on a couple other slideshows of some recent stuff I just finished. Does anybody want to talk about any of the old games or any of the stuff they just saw here before we talk about the movie? How much time have I got? No, we're done. Sorry, you guys don't get to hear about the movie. You don't get to hear about the movie. You don't get to hear about what we're working on next. See, I told you should have interrupted me. Hold on. Where is this? Let's do this. Let's go. All right, real quick, current stuff. We'll go fast through this. One of that game I mentioned that that Laserdisc film, when Doc Mack of the Galloping Ghost, who a lot of you know of, heard that I still had the film, he hired us to finish it. So 30 years in the making, the Lost Laserdisc game. I've had the video on there forever because the music video I posted, 20 years, not 30 years ago, 20 years ago, is now an actual player interactive movie that you can play only at the Galloping Ghost in Chicago, although it's my understanding he's going to put it in production. So we made it so that he can put it in production. It is Mystery Science Theater quality, is much better than this. But it is funny and it's hysterical and it's one of his most addictive games. It's got tons of fans right now. And I'm so delighted that he gave us a chance to finish it. So again, reaching back 30 years and something old is new again. That's been happening a lot here in the last, pardon me? Well, this is the one that we've finished for them. We've got another game that's in process with them that I can't talk about. And then the other thing that is, 30 years in the making, let me just get over here, is Rampage. When I found out about it, I was delighted. I have nothing to do with the movie, apart from making the games, the first two games, nothing to do with the movie. It is coming out on April 13th, and one of the things I love about it, that I got excited about it, is the fact that they have toys now. Those toys that I was hoping would come out 30 years ago, they're there. And yes, that is George in his off hours. That's us. You saw that picture. That was the original design team. That's the people making the movie. Few more people involved in the movie because it is a big budget blockbuster production. I was a little skeptical at first, I gotta say, because every movie that's ever been made from a game stinks. I was asked to buy, and I had nothing to do with I had nothing to do with the movie, but I was asked by the Chicago casting group when they were shooting in Chicago to come out, be an extra. I did. Everybody was wonderful to me. They treated me like royalty. One of the casting guys mentioned to the assistant director and the second unit director who I was, so they shot a cameo of me running down the street, takes behind a big, giant camera on a moving car, and everybody's like, oh, all the extras were applauding when I was done. It's like, man, you really look terrified. It's like I was terrified I was going to have a heart attack. But the reason I'm wearing this, I don't know if it's going to end up on the room floor, but if you see a guy carrying this, running down the street screaming, that's dressed like this, it's me. It's me. And then, and like I said, when I first heard it was a movie, I started grinning. When they invited me to come be an extra, I started grinning even more. Can't get any better than this. Then I get a call from one of the producers who says, I've been wanting to call you for years, but, for legal reasons and corporate reasons, we never wanted to, the lawyers suggested that we not be in touch. But now that you're already part of the movie, you want to come down and hang out on set. So they brought me down to Atlanta where they were filming and put me up and let me meet everybody, and it was wonderful. And because it isn't out yet, I can't show you any of those pictures. Who of those people are? The guy in the middle I can show you. In 3 weeks, I'll be able to show you who I'm hanging out with there and what we're doing. This was, well, I can't say where it was either, because certainly we wouldn't be on set because I can't show any of those pictures yet. But they were great. They treated me like royalty. They went out of their way to tell me the storyline and how it developed and how they tried to keep what I call the humanity of Rampage, because the players are the victims, right? You know, you're the player. You're the one that everybody's rooting for. You're the monster, but you are, you know. And they did a, like I like to tell everybody, I am no longer skeptical, and they did a much better, their movie is a much better movie because it's not my game. The sets were incredible. I will say this, driving out to this studio in the middle of nowhere, and again, maybe still a little skeptical, although Chicago, they really went all over the top. Looked like a big budget thing, but they're driving me to a junkyard. It's like they're filming in a garbage dump because they're trying to save money. No, what turned out was, what I thought was garbage dump was sets of giant destroyed buildings all over the place. And I'm looking at, there's Merchandise Mart. And, you know, from the drive-in, I thought this was piles of wreckage. It's from behind, it's chicken wire and 2x4. I mean, it was incredible. I can't wait to show you all that next year, or at least in 3 weeks online. They were nice. They gave me a tent. It's 110 degrees or 105 degrees out there. They're shooting outdoors. The Rock was and Naomi Harris for some of the ending scenes in the movie. The producer set up a tent with an air conditioner in it for me. Right here. They were filming there. I spent no time in the tent. I was out there standing in the sun all day long, grinning like an idiot, because it can't get any better than this. And I will say this, at the end of the day, everybody says he's a really nice guy, but he's nicer than you can imagine. Everybody was really great to me. But he said, you know, we've been busting our butt on this game. We're really, you know, we're sweating, we're putting everything, and he kept saying, your movie. It's like, it's not my movie, this is my game, it's your movie. He's like, but no, it's your movie. And we're dying out here. And then I look out there and I see this guy with the grin on his face, and it makes it all worthwhile. And I said, oh man, you are even nicer than everybody says you are. He was really a terrific guy. And that's my only Rock story. And then, I don't know how that got in there either. You can't see that either. But yeah, it was a great experience. For those who are skeptical, and they're mad because it doesn't look like my game. Go and enjoy it for what it is. It's going to be a totally standalone movie, and that's my plug on that. All right, now we probably really are out of time. Any questions? Cool. Well, then we'll get out of time.